Certainly, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni now joining us to give us reaction to the medium-term budget policy statement that was announced a bit earlier on. And more emphasis, of course, Minister, is around Operation Vulindlela. And I remember even before the elections, there was a lot of praise for Operation Vulindlela and what Operation Vulindlela has been able to achieve. Songes Ozibia spoke to him a bit earlier on as well. He says, for instance, when it comes to the issuing of water licenses, it's much more fast-tracked than it used to be before. But then the other issue is being raised is that on paper it looks great, but are we getting the results? What's your take on that?
We are getting the results, and I don't have to talk about the water licenses because South Africans may not know majority of them. But how many days without load shedding?
Well, it's been since March.
Yes, over 225 days without load shedding in the country. And that's because of the efforts of Operation Vulindlela. And that's the daily experience of every South African. And you remember when we said this project is working and the reforms are coming along, there was an argument that it was for electioneering. And here we are, and it was said after the elections, load shedding will come back. And they're not even using the gas turbines. It's how they're managing the renewal, the maintenance, and all the things that they're doing to get it right from the Operation Vulindlela and the stake and the partnership, the investment that business put into the solar projects generation, how do you say it? The deregulation of the energy market through Operation Vulindlela, electricity market through the Operation Vulindlela is what is bringing us here and is still going to propel us further. And look at the complaints that we had around Transnet and the logistics sector. We're not yet there, but there's significant progress in terms of the backlog at the ports, in terms of the recovery in the trains, and also the partnerships that we are bringing in line to make sure that works. So those reforms are very critical for us, and as we introduce the next, I almost forgot, the visas that people think the stroke of a pen can change. It took serious effort and work to be done to deal with the visa backlog. That work started in the 6th administration. The China, India preferred tour operators arrangement. We started with that work, and now we are here. It's going to be gazetted, and the tourists are going to come through. So those things are because Operation Vulindlela has been working. It has been driving these reforms. Now in the new phase of the reforms, we are also going to focus on getting our metros to work. And you've seen the intervention, the presidential working group on eThekwini. We are seeing the beaches of eThekwini are now getting cleaner. We are ready for the summer season and the holidays. We are going to have beaches there. We're getting the water issues of eThekwini. We're starting to get a handle of that and resolving that. So that is the work that we continue to do, and those reforms are bearing fruit. And that's why I didn't want to talk about the reforms that majority of South Africans cannot. So we are very happy and confident about the work that is being done through Operation Vulindlela. Yeah.
We're speaking to the leader of the EFF a bit earlier on, Julius Malema, and specifically asking him about, for instance, if you look at the program around Transnet and working with the private sector and the private sector coming on board to deal with these issues around logistics. And he says that this is just another confirmation about the neoliberal policies that the ANC is approaching. And that's the reason why the Democratic Alliance is so happy today to hear what the minister had announced. Your take on this?
I think, I don't know, let's talk about the socialist country, China. The reforms that we are doing in Transnet, in Eskom, everywhere, that's the same reforms that they've done in China. Maybe people must go and read about the history. It took China 45 years to be where they are, including the reforms of their own state-owned parastatals to be able to perform to where they are now. They came in and copied our model, and they've done better. In China, for example, if you go there now, you find that majority of the services that you say are done by government in the country, they're done by a Chinese state-owned company with participation of the private sector in a very active manner. And that's what we are saying. Because government will never have full capacity on its own. Yes, we need to have our state-owned enterprises to perform. But if the injection of capital and injection of skill by the private sector will fast-track our ability to respond, why shouldn't we do it for the benefit of the economy of the country?
Let's quickly speak about the SOEs. Before the elections, of course, we had a Department of Public Enterprises that has now fallen away. How far are we in terms of legislation in relation to the holding company for all of these SOEs? And I remember even with the former minister, Mboweni, who had said that there's a list of SOEs, but government should be looking into which SOEs are not necessarily a priority for the state and that the state can get rid of. Is government still consolidating that list?
So the list was consolidated, but the view and the bill was in Parliament as, let me start. So the SOEs have been moved to policy departments. Then the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, they're looking on a governance system for the SOEs. As we speak now, Minister Ramokgopa is in China, copying the model that China has followed with their SOE governance. The whole journey they followed, and they've done a study about our own SOEs to say what would be the best route forward in terms of the modeling. And the notion that there are SOEs that we do not, or junior, that they are not significant and whatever, it's not there. Why it's not there is because it's the impact that SOE does. Let me give you an example. I was a COO of State Information Technology Agency, SITA. During my time, SITA was a 6.3 billion rand turnover entity. Are you going to say that entity, and that was way back, that entity is a small entity? It's not a small entity given the responsibility that it has of driving digitalization of government and all those. So you need to look at that and say, where do you put the governance arrangements of SITA? So you must have a standard uniformity because each SOE, you must have its growth trajectory and growth paths and its contribution to the economy. If it doesn't contribute to the economy, it's a different discussion. But if it contributes, even in a minuscule way, you must have a conversation, what is its growth trajectory and how do we manage that growth trajectory?
Yep. Just a final one, of course, not related to what the minister was speaking about today, but the government of national unity, the issue around the Ukraine special dispensation with the visa agreement. Minister Leon Schreiber making an announcement, and then there was a U-turn, and now decision has been taken to defer that particular agreement. One, why was that agreement deferred? But two, have you, as the government of national unity, now dealt with who speaks on what and at what point do they speak on those issues?
So, okay. On policy issues, there is the government communicators and the cabinet spokesperson that speaks, which is myself. And then, but there are departmental issues which ministers and their spokesperson and the heads of communication speak on. And let me start back on the Ukraine issue so that we don't get lost on this one. You remember when we said to the country, when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, and we said we are impartial and we are mediating on that conflict. And all of you, media, opposition parties, says, no, you are lying, you are friends to Russia and all that. And we said, no, we are mediators. So what happened was our envoys, our officials, including my officials at the State Security Agency, had to travel to Ukraine as part of the mediation efforts. And I can announce this without fear of contradiction. South Africa was very critical in the consolidation of the list of missing children from Ukraine. South Africa was very critical on consolidation of the list of the prisoners of war. And that had to happen, people had to travel in between. So to travel, you need an official passport or a diplomatic passport to make it easier. Because normal passport, you can travel, but it's a bit complicated. So when you say to Ukraine, we want you to recognize our official and diplomatic passport, they say we want reciprocity. So when you want reciprocity, we can't say because we want, we can't give you. Then we started a process. That's what Minister Schreiber and the response that says, no, you are wrong. That when that reciprocity was required, we started to discuss this mechanism. So now where we are is to say, do we still need that mechanism given the progress that's happening with the mediation effort and all the other countries that are also participating in there, and that majority of the meetings are not taking place in Ukraine, they're taking place in other countries. So that's the reason for the deferment. That's why the response was there cannot be pressure on the president to accent to that because there may not be need for us to have that. And that was done because it was a cheap shot, and I must say, it was done in response to the issue of saying South Africa we're a good ally of Russia. We are a good ally of Russia because we are in the partnership of BRICS. We are a good ally to China, we are a good ally to everybody who's in the BRICS, as much as we are a good ally to the countries of the G20 and also the G7 plus, because we are also invited there. So, we've explained, I've explained to the minister to say, there's no politics in the GNU, there's government work, and there's no point scoring. The foreign policy of government remains the sole is directed solely by the head of state, and that policy is set. And what we need to finalize, which is a review of what we had, is a national interest conversation of the country. What is it that's in our national interest? Because there's a tendency to project us as an enemy or adversary to the USA. We are not. We have sought to clarify, and we are getting the Minister of Defense to clarify our drills and release the schedule of the drills, the military drills and exercises that we do with the American Americans, not only Americans, but with everybody. But there's a tendency that when there's a military exercise with Russia or China, it gets to be blown up in the media. But there's no focus on the exercises that we do with the Americans. So it's never, we said our only interest in South Africa is the interest of South Africa, the SADC region, and Africa. That's our priorities.
So does deferment mean that there may not be a need anymore?
Deferment means if there's no need, we will not proceed. If there's a need, we'll proceed.
If there's a need, we'll proceed. If there's no need, we'll proceed. But how did you end up here? Because the statement that was released by the presidency before Minister Schreiber issued his tweet was that it will be signed. So what happened between those 24 hours?
So it will be signed if there's a need. If there's value.
Yeah, but what happened, Minister, in between those 24 hours? Because remember, it was the presidency that issued the statement that said that Minister Ronald Lamula's counterpart will be in the country, and there's this particular agreement that would be signed as well. Then what happened after that tweet from Minister Schreiber that there has been now a deferment? What happened to the need?
So let me then explain the process. So if an agreement of that nature has to be signed, it will mean the Ukrainians have to sign so that we can also sign. So the counterpart of Minister Lamula would have to sign on behalf, it's not a Minister Schreiber, on behalf of the country to enable the signing by the president that will authorize the signing by Minister Schreiber. You understand? Because it's called a presidential minute.
Yeah.
So we need to first have a country agreement. And the person or the department responsible for country agreements, that's why every time we go to sign MOUs and international agreements, bilateral agreements, it's always the Department of International Relations. So that step has to be done. And when that is done, then the presidential minute gets signed.
Yeah.
So to enable then the department to act. So that is the chain. So if the country agreement is not done, they cannot then be the next process. So what happened was, I will not know between Home Affairs and DECO why the other ones jumped the gun. But the work that DECO had to do, if you recall, we were just coming back from the BRICS summit. So there should have been an update from DECO, and the minister was with us at BRICS. There should have been an update to say this is how we are, this is the hurdle that we are confronting here, this is how we are proposing and solving how we resolve that hurdle. And when we have resolved that hurdle, we then proceed. If that hurdle is not resolved, we then wait for that hurdle to be resolved. That's how bilateral agreements gets entered into.
I don't know if I'm convinced, Minister. What's the hurdle?
I will not know that. I'm not Minister of International Relations. But honestly, let me give you one example. So we go to the BRICS forum.
Yeah.
Then a declaration has to be agreed. There's a small point in that declaration that says the Johannesburg Summit declaration, We're not happy with that text. We then say to the country, to the other countries, this is the formulation that we prefer, and we lobby amongst each other. There are two options that happen. Sometimes we agree on the text, sometimes we don't agree on the text, and we remove that. So if we think it's fundamental, you cannot go ahead and proceed with that declaration. And I didn't want to use the country because you're going to say, what is the specific issue? So that's what happens. So if there's an issue which international relation cannot solve, it then gets sent back to the technical teams to propose a formulation. The legal teams must come in and propose a formulation. And then when that is done, then it comes back to the political leaders to then sign.
Okay. Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, thank you so much for your time, Minister. In the presidency, they're giving her remarks with regards to, what happened with the Government of National Unity a few days ago, that fallout between the presidency spokesperson as well as the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Leon Schreiber, who of course we know is with the Government of National Unity. And as you just heard there, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni saying that the response from Minister Schreiber was actually, quote, a cheap shot at the president of the country, referring to Russia as a friend as well as an ally.